I don't know how many people caught this, but Lahaina has found itself at the center of yet another curious controversy. The prominent Hawaii News Now business reporter Howard Dykes declared on a recent broadcast that social media was awash with conspiracy theories regarding a mysterious satellite weapon that purportedly incinerated the town of Lahaina. Even more astonishing, he went on to say that cybersecurity experts linked the rumors to an unlikely collaboration between China and Russia. I say unlikely because while China and Russia are indeed meeting, which is a concern enough and a worthy topic of another conversation, I think all of us are hard-pressed to believe their conversation extended to ridiculous social media campaigns about Lahaina. However, it would seem from the outset that not just the people of Lahaina, but smart people everywhere already had their suspicions about the unusual winds and even the poorly explained reasons of the ignition itself. One such event was the baffling alteration in wind patterns initially attributed to Hurricane Dora, which was predicted to pass well south of the Hawaiian Islands and indeed remained over 800 miles away. But are there more to these anomalies than meets the eye? Or has even eyewitnesses and everyone on the planet that's had a moment to see the high-definition photos just lost their minds? Do you want to find out? Fasten your seatbelts. Nap time is over. Join us in this short 20-minute video through a weather anomalies and mysterious storms where the boundaries between nature and human intervention blur in an attempt to unravel the intriguing case of Lahaina's demise. This short video delves into the history of weather modification, the science behind it, and the ethical dilemmas it poses. From cloud seeding to hurricane mitigation, we'll uncover the methods used to influence weather patterns. Together, we'll explore the intricacies and implications of wielding control over the forces of nature and how it has affected our lives in the past and continues to do so.
In modern times, we can trace weather modification back to James Pollard Espy, who published The Philosophy of Storms in 1841, wherein he explained how storms are driven by winds, vertical convection, and condensation. Scientists from all over began theorizing ways of controlling these factors to manipulate the weather. And by 1946, General Electric began using dry ice to seed clouds and create snow. The first scientifically controlled experiment of successful weather modification occurred in 1948, when Dr. Irving Langmuir was able to produce rain by artificially seeding clouds. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. Army used cloud seeding to extend the monsoon season in specific areas. This controversial use of weather modification as a weapon of war was classified, and when it was later revealed to the public, people were understandably concerned. In 1977, the Convention on the Prohibition of Hostile Use of Environmental Modification Techniques was signed in Geneva, with the hopes of preventing any nation from using weather modification as a means of war. By the end of the 20th century, dozens of countries were using cloud seeding and other techniques to successfully modify the weather. In 2008, Beijing's Institute of Artificial Influence on the Weather announced its intention of manipulating the weather to ensure optimum conditions for the Olympics. In 2010, Abu Dhabi was able to produce dozens of storms creating rain, hail, wind gales, and lightning. As technology and weather modification advanced, it was not openly discussed in the public forum, and after decades of successful operations, was considered a conspiracy theory in pop culture.
I've read some theories that HAARP can be used to manipulate the weather. Is this possible?
Yeah, HAARP is, Mahili, what is it? High altitude
radio pension.
I always forget the acronym.
Yeah.
There are people who are sure that the government is stockpiling aliens and controlling everything about anything we would ever think about. And they clearly have never worked for the government because the level of incompetence of the government and inefficiency knows no bounds.
But
for starters,
it's true that you could manipulate the weather like they did during the Olympics in China. Like, it's not that you can't manipulate the weather. It's that whether you would really have any serious control.
Yeah, a lot of the weather, weather happens in many places. So it comes about from the heat balance, from the energy coming from the sun, what it reflects off of, what it gets absorbed by, what the upcurrents do, what the downdrafts do, what the rotation of the Earth is doing. All of this factors in. And so I have not been convinced by any of the reports to suggest that experiments in the upper atmosphere, physics experiments, are having any effect on our weather whatsoever.
Right.
And it would be tragic if we wanted to say, oh, that's why it's getting hotter in the world, okay? Because there's some experiment happening. That would be tragic because we would be missing the 900-pound gorilla in the room.
In 2008, articles were published on how scientists were learning how to steer hurricanes by injecting heat into the upper atmosphere. The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, otherwise known as HAARP, jointly funded by the U.S. military and DARPA, is used to excite a limited area of the ionosphere using microwaves that produce high levels of heat. On October 27, 2012, Hurricane Sandy weakened to a tropical storm. Microwave imagery shows a thick red beam was then directed at Hurricane Sandy. Immediately following the red beam, Sandy is strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane and takes the mysterious left turn into New Jersey. In 2016, former director of the CIA, John Brennan, spoke of the real threat of weather modification technology.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations.
In December of 2020, it is announced that China will be expanding its weather modification program, saying it will be able to cover half the country in artificial rain and snow in just 4 years from now. In a time-lapse video, this winter's polar vortex behaved as expected for nearly 2 months. Then, on January 20th, the same day as Joe Biden's inauguration, a swirling black hole can be seen punching through the storm above China, upsetting the polar vortex, and ultimately pushing it down to Texas. The power was shut off, dozens were killed in their own beds, and the government blamed fossil fuel technologies.
The bottom line is, Texas thought it could go at it alone and built a system that ignored climate change. It was not what's called resilient. And now Texas is paying the price. I hope they learn the lesson. When we build power, when we build anything now, we have to take into account that climate change is real, or people will be caught the way the people in Texas were.
Now Bill Gates is warning that climate change, along with biotech, are the next big threats. If they can convince you that weather control is a fantasy of conspiracy theorists, and if they can make it snow where and when they want, then it's checkmate for the globalists. Now we can see why they have made the global warming hoax their biggest agenda.
A chemical trail leaves a plume that stays in the sky for many hours. And chemtrails are rarely seen alone. What we most commonly see are X patterns, parallel rows, tic-tac-toe-like grids in the sky. And of course, airliners do not fly those kind of traffic patterns, particularly over rural areas where they're rarely seen. So chemical trails last a long time, and another giveaway is that if the sun is behind them, we often see a prismatic or rainbow effect in the sky through those chemical trails, indicating, scientists have told me, indicating the presence of chemicals in the air.
Stratospheric well-back seeding for reduction of global warming. A process to reflect infrared energy back into space. And this patent called for chemicals to be sprayed into the greenhouse gas layer, wait for this, 22,000 feet and higher. What were they going to spray? Oxides of metal. Which oxide? Aluminum oxide. Now you're saying, well, that's a heck of a lot of airplanes, fly a lot of missions to spray that kind of material. So we turned to the United States Air Force, and you know what I found? They happen to own over 800 tanker aircraft, KC-135 and KC-10 aircraft. Exactly the planes that we have positively identified in hundreds of photographs and miles of videotape as the aircraft spraying these chemtrails.
You mentioned earlier that you're a pilot.
Yeah.
Talk about chemtrails. We hear a lot about that. What are those, and are they for real?
Well, when you look into that and ask questions, they say, oh yeah, contrails. No, contrails are behind a jet. If you see a jet flying very high, the condensed stripe behind it. That's normal. But in areas first observed where there's very little population, you see a jet airplane going, it's not only one, they have 4 condensed stripes behind them. They go this way, this way, this way, this way, and then this way, this way, this way, this way. And when you inquire about it, ask people, you recognize that the real climate change scientists are truly ticked off because apparently nobody really is asking them. It's the special interests, in my opinion, it's the oil industry, the energy industry that are blowing smoke up somebody's you know what and telling them that we have to lay a pattern up there to prevent sun energy from hitting Earth. And what they're doing in there, it's now pretty much determined. They're putting the aluminum, barium, and strontium. Now you take these chemicals and run them through a PubMed literature search in respect to human health. You will find more than 3,000 papers. Aluminum alone, aluminum Alzheimer's, right, mental, there's no question about it. Now it so happens, when there were people who really paid attention, if there was due to some weather and air changes, wind patterns, suddenly this stuff that they're laying out there comes down in rain. If it falls on crops, it kills the crops. It's like they have big blisters on any one of the crops, vegetables or things like this. Organic crops, totally destroyed, can't even use them.
All 3 of these elements, if ingested enough by the body, could lead to health problems. For example, ingestion of too much aluminum may potentially cause Alzheimer's, as well as respiratory failure. Barium can have similar effects like making you nausea or have a severe impact to your heart. And I can go on. The bottom line is that all 3 chemicals have some sort of major impact to our health if we ingest high levels of it, of course. And the thing is, every day, at least most of the time, they're spraying these things everywhere in the skies, exponentially, almost non-stop. And I think the point that I'm trying to get across is that how can we avoid all this ingestion of aluminum, barium, strontium from the sky, from these chemtrails, if they're spraying almost every day? And the thing is, all this lands on trees, the food, the oceans, the waters, the lakes, the plants, everywhere, even the insects.
About a third of the American food supply depends on bees. They help pollinate many crops, but the bee population is declining. This nature preserve in Chester County is trying to reverse that with a pollination garden to attract bees. But they'll face a new challenge as the U.S. Department of Agriculture suspends collecting data for its annual honeybee colonies report, an important tool for understanding the plummeting honeybee population.
What you would see is more desert than you would see healthy, vibrant landscapes. Their critical impact is on the food source.
Scientists say bee populations have been steadily declining for more than a decade because of parasites, pesticides, habitat loss, and climate change.
You know, it's pretty funny that mainstream scientists and media always tend to blame global warming or climate change for every disease or natural disaster out there that occurs on a daily basis. Yet they avoid anything else but CO2. For example, there's something called cirrus clouds. Cirrus clouds are induced by supposed persistent long contrails. These cirrus clouds trap heat, and in these cirrus clouds are soot and carbon black dust. In soot, there's aluminum, barium, and a whole bunch of elements in them that fall out and create these looking cirrus clouds.
Soot is filled with metals such as chromium, iron, molybdenum, sodium, calcium, aluminum, vanadium, barium, cobalt, copper, nickel, lead, magnesium, manganese, silicon, titanium, and zirconium. Considering that some fraction of soot can effectively act as an ice-nucleating particle, and that a dominant fraction of ice residuals in cirrus clouds contain metal compounds, the presented findings support the assumption that aircraft engine emissions can act as ice-nucleating particles, or cloud condensation nuclei, or just generically called a cloud seed.
If you're still in doubt that these trails in the skies aren't containing chemicals or particulates, I would recommend looking at the samples that I will present right now. Some of these samples contain high amounts of aluminum, barium, or even strontium, or even other elements just higher than their normal rate of level.
It is called geoengineering, fighting global warming by putting a chemical dust in the atmosphere and reflecting harmful radiation back into space.
You could use barium oxide, for example, which makes big fluffy clouds. But you could use tiny little bits of aluminum, which is benign in the environment, and essentially manage the climate.
And what I found was unusual spiking since the early 1990s in barium, aluminum.
But Rosalind Peterson of California Skywatch says health department records show a sharp increase in both chemicals in the water supply of Northern California, dating from the time the huge contrails first appeared over her home in Mendocino County.
What's the significance of the barium and the aluminum?
I went and got all the tests, and all these things in the same test would be up way over state and federal standards. It had to be airborne, because how could it get to such diverse regions of our county? We have jets going in every direction. X's, east, west, north, south, circles. There is something going on in the air. I don't know exactly what, but I think there's some experimentation.
I would also recommend listening to David Keefe's presentations, as he himself and many of his other geoengineer lobbyists have explored the possibility of using aluminum and other elements for geoengineering.
I'll tell you a little bit about some new work we've been doing, thinking about how you actually might put aerosols in the stratosphere. The novel method we've been thinking about, or it's not novel at all, it's actually exactly what happens from aircraft contrails, is that we put a condensable, a few megatons a year of sulfur would be enough to produce sort of 4 watts per square meter radiant forcing directly out of the back of an aircraft. There's a huge literature in the nanofabrication world about making fine particles from low vapor pressure gas, and there's nothing very hard in terms of aircraft engineering. If you go to aircraft engineers and we've done this, they say that would be easy, we could do this if you want us to. We've mostly thought about sulfur, and there's a lot of good reasons to think about sulfur, because sulfur is what nature does, at least in this version of the model, is if you put sulfur in continuously, you actually get a remarkably ineffective result. Nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. The big deal really is that alumina has 4 times the volumetric rate as sulfur. with roughly 16 times less the coagulation rate. So you could get away, we think, with much smaller mass flow. The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make high-quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it certainly seems pretty cost-effective and easy to do this with aircraft that are not very different from conventional aircraft. High-class business jets like the Gulfstream have wing designs that are very efficient. So with slightly different engine choices, they can easily deliver large weights up to sort of 20 kilometers or a little higher. And you could do that by either building new versions of these aircraft or even re-engineering existing aircraft. We have engineering firms that can do it. So you go to an engineering firm and you want this done. They don't say this is hard or unusual. They say, okay, yes, we could do it.
I don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
Yeah, it's a measure of the feeling of desperation that some of them feel.
Are they really thinking they could do that?
Well, some of them are seriously proposing, and I think it's completely nuts.
Yep.
You put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore, but it would block out some of the sun's heat so that we wouldn't have to take the difficult steps to stop spewing all this global warming pollution into the atmosphere. And of course, there are a lot of problems with what they're proposing.
As for anyone who doubts that a global chemtrail program is occurring, I would encourage you to take a step back. Let's first go over the first excuse, the World War II bombers.
Countless disinformation sources are doing their best to try and cast doubt in the public's mind about the blatantly obvious climate engineering assault going on in skies around the globe. They tell us climate engineering is not happening. And what do they offer as proof for such a conclusion? They often refer to photos or film footage of World War II B-17 bombers leaving massive trails behind them during bombing runs, as if this somehow proves we should see the same massive trails behind modern, high-bypass, turbofan jet engines that are standard equipment on all military tankers and all commercial carriers. What the official sources of disinformation don't tell us about the World War II piston engine bombers is that they were actually equipped with water vapor injection systems for their primitive piston-driven engines. These engines also put out immense amounts of pollution and particulate matter, which further facilitated the potential for forming visible trails. The World War II bomber film footage you are looking at clearly shows a starting and stopping sequence of the trail emitting from the aircraft. What does this mean? It means that what we're seeing is not simply a result of typical exhaust condensation, as we've been told. U.S. patents for climate engineering processes go back at least to 1920, and historical documents prove the U.S. military was openly engaged in climate modification experimentation and deployment by the mid-1940s. So what type of trail exactly are we seeing behind the B-17s that's being turned on and off? Is it the water vapor injection systems? Is it related to early weather modification experiments? We can speculate, but this is certain. A condensation trail doesn't start and stop midair as if it was cut with a knife. There are no such atmospheric conditions that would create such an abrupt cessation of a naturally occurring exhaust vapor trail. The official denial of the ongoing global climate engineering assault is far beyond criminal. The public's propensity to blindly accept the official denial of what they can easily see and clearly see with their own eyes is beyond perplexing and troubling. The upper-level canopy of jet aircraft sprayed solar radiation management particulate trails is blatantly obvious to anyone who's willing to utilize their sense of vision and their sense of reason.
While people like Dane Wigington are exposing the dangers of this global geoengineering program, mainstream media continues to discredit all viable sources with their term conspiracy theory and leaving Wikipedia links to their point of view of this whole chemtrail aerosol spraying, leading the masses into the conception of condensation trails, which I don't deny, but what we're seeing globally, the spraying, the haze, the weird cloud patterns, are certainly not water vapor.
By the USPTO.gov is from the government, is providing this information. It is public. So here is the USPTO, United States Patent and Trademark Office. If you look to the right, these are the patents. If you look to the left, these are the dates that they happened and what they're doing. 1920 is when it started to happen. The process and apparatus for the production of intense artificial clouds, fog, or mist. And they go on.
In closing, we ventured into the realm of weather modification from the mysteries surrounding Lahaina to the broader world of controlling the elements. As we wrap up this exploration, we hope to leave you with a newfound understanding of the science, controversies, and consequences tied to this fascinating field. So if you thought you may be losing your mind amidst the whirlwind of rumors and speculation, perhaps this video cleared up as many questions as it caused. We appreciate you joining us on this journey, and thank you for checking it out. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep your eyes on the ever-changing skies above. My name is Ethan Shelton. Once again, aloha.